Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take complex piles of information and turn them into essential, engaging knowledge just for you.
Today, we are plumbing the depths of a figure whose legacy is, well, it's so monumental it often overshadows the man himself.
John Winston Lennon.
Exactly. He was the founder of the Beatles, half of maybe the most successful songwriting partnership in history with Paul McCartney.
And really the most recognizable yet often contradictory voice of the 1960s and 70s counterculture.
It's so necessary for us to look at John Lennon beyond, the peace signs and the anthems. His life, so tragically cut short at just 40 years old, was this continuous, almost chaotic cycle of reinvention and confrontation.
So our mission today is really to analyze the layers beneath the fame.
Yeah, we're delving into the surprisingly complex and, frankly, traumatic personal history that forged his unique artistic voice.
We're talking about the painful relationships, the radical artistic shifts.
The deep commitment to conceptual art, and, of course, the political activism that put him directly in the crosshairs of power.
And we have sources covering every single epoch of his life, from his birth in Liverpool in 1940 right up through the posthumous continuation of his work.
Including that technological marvel that allowed the release of Now and Then in 2023.
Right, and this material, it really allows us to highlight a few recurring themes that define him.
The first one has to be the profound shaping influence of his childhood turmoil.
Absolutely. Then there's his natural, almost instinctive tendency toward disruption and nonconformity.
And critically, how his intense, often volatile relationships fueled every single major artistic period of his career.
We're looking for the linkages, right?
Yes. What connects the class clown throwing punches in Liverpool to the activist being targeted by the FBI in New York?
And the answer, as the source material reveals, is a lifetime of trying to reconcile deep personal pain with an extraordinary public platform.
Okay, let's unpack the architect of modern pop and see how those internal pressures shaped the man who eventually told the world to imagine.
We have to start where it all began. Liverpool, October 9th, 1940. He was born John Winston Lennon.
Which is a truly British name, partially for his paternal grandfather, John Jack Lennon, and partially for Prime Minister Winston Churchill.
But from day one, his family life was just defined by instability and absence.
The domestic situation was messy, to put it mildly. His father, Alfred Lennon, was a merchant seaman of Irish descent.
So he was perpetually absent.
Perpetually. And when he eventually went absent without leave from his ship in February 1944, the regular allotment checks just stopped completely.
But what's fascinating, though, is the brief attempt at a return.
Right. 6 months later, Alfred tried to come back and care for John, but by then, Julia, his mother, she was pregnant with another man's child.
And she rejected the idea entirely.
She did. And that moment, that really sealed the abandonment for John.
So this instability meant that John was constantly shifting around.
Constantly. His aunt Mimi Smith and her husband, Uncle George Smith, they eventually took guardianship.
And this was after Mimi complained twice to Liverpool's social services.
Yes, because Julia was just demonstrably struggling to cope.
Yeah.
So he was raised primarily in this staunchly middle-class environment of Mendips, 251 Men Love Avenue.
Which was miles away, socially and psychologically from his mother's more bohemian lifestyle.
Completely. And the sources paint this rich picture of his initial family unit. Lennon himself later described it in a really fascinating way.
He said his initial family experience was with 5 strong, intelligent, beautiful women.
5 sisters, one of whom was his mother. And he explicitly said this provided his first feminist education.
That's a crucial context. It shows his deep connection to powerful female figures, but also the instability.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
He later admitted to a deep, lifelong envy of traditional, stable homes.
And what does a nonconformist do with envy?
He tries to disrupt the standard. He often recounted trying to disrupt his friends' homes by telling them, parents are not gods because I don't live with mine and therefore I know better.
Wow. So that foundational nonconformist streak, that urge to challenge authority, it was rooted right there.
In the personal pain of his fractured childhood.
Exactly.
And his aunt, Mimi, she certainly recognized this troublemaking streak. She represented all those traditional middle-class values of the era.
And Lennon himself described this lifelong internal conflict, saying a part of him genuinely wanted to be accepted by society, to be a normal, respectable man.
But he couldn't.
He found he simply couldn't be anything other than a loudmouth lunatic poet-musician.
And that internal friction, it just manifested so strongly in his schooling. He attended Quarrymen High School from 1952 to 1957.
And his behavior was notoriously disruptive. Teachers' notes consistently said he was frequently in fights, actively bullied others.
And established himself as the dedicated class clown.
Yeah, his report cards were dismal. They often complained that his work lacked effort and he was perfectly content to just drift instead of using his obvious intelligence. But we have to pause on these academic struggles because the source material brings forward a critical, often overlooked detail.
Yes, that Lennon faced significant challenges due to undiagnosed dyslexia.
Which would have negatively impacted his reading and writing skills and, of course, contributed to his poor academic standing.
Absolutely. When you're a highly intelligent person who struggles with the fundamental building blocks of formal education, what do?
You compensate. You become the rebel or the comedian.
Exactly. And his struggles contributed to his eventual expulsion from the Liverpool College of Art before his final year. It wasn't because of a lack of talent.
It was because an inability to comply with the rigid structure.
Precisely. Yet the urge to create was just so powerful. If he couldn't excel in formal literature, he would just create his own.
Which he did. His early creative outlets were satirical and subversive, taking aim at the very establishment that rejected him.
Right, in his self-made school magazine called The Daily Howl.
The Daily Howl is such a window into his early psyche. It had comical cartoons known for brutal wordplay, satire.
And interestingly, what his peers described as disturbing drawings of crippled people.
Which points to that dark, absurdist wit that would later flavor his published writings.
The content wasn't just humorous. It was pushing boundaries, using shock and dark comedy to process what he was seeing in society.
And this leads us directly to the fateful introduction to the tool that would channel all that chaotic energy, music.
And his mother, Julia, was the one who encouraged this path. She knew Mimi, the strict guardian, would disapprove of such, frivolous pursuits.
So Julia understood his need for an outlet.
She did. She bought him his first guitar, an inexpensive Galatone Champion acoustic, lending him £5 and 10 shillings.
And to bypass Mimi's inevitable objection, she insisted it be delivered directly to her house.
Smart move, ensuring Mimi wouldn't intervene or, destroy it.
And Mimi delivered the line that will live forever in rock history.
Oh, yes. She famously told him, "The guitar's all very well, John, but you'll never make a living out of it."
It's the ultimate example of parental skepticism fueling a defiant ambition.
Absolutely. But this creative bond with Julia, who also taught him the banjo and Fats Domino's Ain't That a Shame, was just brutally and suddenly severed.
The trauma that defined his late adolescence was Julia's death in July 1958. She was only 44.
Struck and killed by an off-duty police officer driving a car while she was just walking home after visiting the Smith house.
The fallout was just devastating.
I mean, he was a teenage boy who had already experienced the pain of one parent vanishing.
Only to lose the parent who had finally connected him to his true artistic self.
And the subsequent 2 years were marked by just emotional chaos, heavy drinking, frequent fighting, a blind rage that consumed him.
The source material shows this was a true reckoning for him.
It's no surprise that her memory later became a major, often painful, creative inspiration, fueling his most confessional work, like the song Julia.
You can see the direct line now. Abandonment and chaos driving artistic nonconformity.
And that raw, angry energy he carried after Julia's death immediately found an outlet in music.
In September 1956, at age 15, he formed a skiffle group. A mix of folk, blues, and jazz, called the Quarrymen.
Named after Quarry Bank High School. And this leads us to the most consequential meeting in modern popular culture.
July 1957, at the Quarrymen's second performance at the St. Peter's Church Garden Fete.
He was introduced to a younger, musically sophisticated local named Paul McCartney.
And Lennon, ever the leader, immediately asked him to join.
But the dynamic was immediately fraught, even outside the band. McCartney's father declared that Lennon would certainly get his son into trouble.
And Mimi, of course, was highly critical. She was very aware that John's new friends were perceived as lower-class ruffians.
But despite the disapproval, the bond was sealed. They rehearsed constantly in the relative safety of the McCartney family's front room.
And the lineup solidified quickly, bringing in George Harrison.
Right, but Lennon, the self-proclaimed leader, initially thought George was too young. He was only 14.
But an audition orchestrated by McCartney on the upper deck of a Liverpool bus,
where Harrison impressively played the complicated instrumental Raunchy.
That sealed the deal. By early 1960, with the addition of his art school friend Stuart Sutcliffe on bass, they became the Beatles.
And this nascent band was then thrown into the crucible of Hamburg.
August 1960, the Beatles, including drummer Pete Best, were engaged for a brutal 48-night residency in West Germany.
We're talking marathon sets, 7 days a week.
The physical demands were just unsustainable. They had to find ways to maintain energy for performances that ran all night.
And the source material details that Lennon, along with the others, regularly took Priaden.
A powerful amphetamine.
Right, often used as a diet pill, but they used it as a stimulant to endure those long, grueling overnight performances.
And that detail is so crucial for you, the listener, because it connects directly to the unsustainable pace of early fame.
Exactly. This chemically enhanced intensity, followed by the exhaustion of Beatlemania, that's the underlying context for his later mental breakdown.
They were just running on fumes.
They were. And when Brian Epstein took over as manager in 1962, he recognized the need to polish the image. He strongly influenced their dress code, their stage attitude.
Forcing them into matching suits and synchronized bows.
Which Lennon, the natural nonconformist, initially resisted. He felt they were selling out their rock and roll edge.
But he eventually complied with that fantastic quote, "I'll wear a bloody balloon if somebody's going to pay me."
The money and the promise of mainstream acceptance convinced the anarchist to temporarily put on a suit.
And the Lennon-McCartney partnership just exploded. They yielded 8 of the 14 tracks on their 1963 debut album, Please Please Me.
But the goal initially was just simple commercial pop. Lennon described those early lyrics as almost irrelevant. They were focused solely on creating a sound that would sell.
Not profound poetry, not yet.
Not yet. But even as he conformed to the suits, that disruption was always waiting to surface.
And his natural irreverence toward the establishment was never better displayed than at the Royal Variety Show.
Performing for the Queen Mother and British royalty, he pauses the performance and delivers that infamous joke.
For the people in the cheaper seats, clap your hands. And the rest of you, if you'll just rattle your jewelry.
That one line just summarizes his entire relationship with authority. It was a playful insult wrapped in an innocent request.
Defiant, but just charming enough to be forgiven.
For a while. By the mid-decade, that charm was wearing thin, and the stress of constant touring, filmmaking, and global fame was just overwhelming.
Lennon grew profoundly concerned that the continuous fan screaming meant their actual musicianship was suffering. He was tired of being a Beatle.
It was sinking into depression and anxiety, and this internal stress led to what he later called his Fat Elvis period.
He put on weight, became reclusive, and subconsciously signaled a need for a dramatic change.
And this distress was poured directly into the 1965 song Help. He confirmed that song was deeply personal. It was genuinely him singing Help.
It wasn't a clever pop tune, it was a desperate cry.
A desperate cry. And this period of immense pressure was further complicated by the involuntary introduction to LSD in March 1965.
When a dentist, hosting a dinner party, secretly spiked the coffee of Lennon, Harrison, and their partners.
Which ushered in a profound shift in his perception of reality. And this shift, combined with the stress of global idolatry, led to the single most explosive comment of his early fame.
The more popular than Jesus controversy.
In a March 1966 interview, he mused, "Christianity will go. It will vanish and shrink. We're more popular than Jesus now. I don't know which will go first, rock and roll or Christianity."
And the context is so key here. That comment went largely unnoticed in the UK.
Right, but when it was quoted in a U.S. magazine 5 months later, the reaction was furious and dangerous.
It triggered mass public burnings of Beatles records, actual Ku Klux Klan threats against him in the American South.
And ultimately contributed directly to the band's unanimous decision to stop touring permanently after August 1966.
What stands out to me is that this controversy didn't just cause outrage, it forced a change in his entire creative process.
It shifted him from road musician to studio artist. And the cessation of touring led to the band's famous studio years and an explosion of innovation.
After filming the anti-war black comedy How I Won the War in 1967, he rejoined the band for an extended, focused recording period.
And this time saw the release of Strawberry Fields Forever, which Time magazine hailed for its astonishing inventiveness.
And the landmark Stomp Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. Lennon later cited Strawberry Fields Forever as his finest work with the band.
This new environment allowed his political conscience to emerge more clearly. All You Need Is Love was performed in late June 1967 for the Our World satellite broadcast.
Reaching an estimated international audience of 400 million.
And while simplistic, it became the defining anti-war anthem for the Summer of Love, showing him using his platform for global messaging.
And this explosion of studio creativity and conceptual thinking coincides perfectly with the pivotal relationship that fundamentally reshaped his life.
Yoko Ono,
Lennon first met the multimedia artist on November 9, 1966, at the Indica Gallery in London, where she was preparing a conceptual art exhibit.
And the interaction itself is just a fantastic anecdote that highlights their initial intellectual sparring match.
Right, Lennon was intrigued by Ono's piece, Hammer a Nail. It was a clean board meant to be hammered into.
And Lennon wanted to hammer a nail. Ono stopped him. When the gallery owner convinced her that Lennon was a millionaire who might buy the piece, she relented, but only if he paid 5 shillings.
His famous reply, which just encapsulates his wit and his embrace of concept, was, "I'll give you an imaginary 5 shillings and hammer an imaginary nail in."
She also later recalled him taking a very physical bite out of an apple on display in her conceptual art piece, Apple.
Which was meant to represent a commodity.
And she was furious. It was a clash of two powerful creative forces.
That initial playful antagonism quickly grew into an obsessive, all-consuming relationship.
Ono began visiting and calling him at his home. Lennon, who admitted he had been a hitter and had a chauvinistic attitude until he met Ono, was just entirely captivated by this independent conceptual artist.
And the source material is clear that the final dissolution of the Beatles was hastened by Lennon's insistence on having Ono present in the studio at all times.
Which was a direct contravention of established band policy and severely heightened the already critical internal tensions.
They immediately began their own conceptual collaborations, recording 3 avant-garde albums together between 1968 and 69.
Starting with Unfinished Music No. 1, Two Virgins, which infamously was known more for its controversial nude cover than its actual experimental music.
Lennon, feeling the pressure, was pushing the band toward more extreme sonic and conceptual places.
He finally told the band he was leaving the Beatles on September 20th, 1969, though he agreed to keep it secret while contract negotiations were underway.
He felt the need to control the narrative.
Oh, absolutely. The final blow to him came when Paul McCartney publicized his own departure in April 1970 upon releasing his solo album.
And Lennon was outraged at what he saw as a betrayal, reacting with genuine fury.
He said, Jesus Christ, he gets all the credit for it.
Though he eventually softened on the specific circumstances, he later summarized his definitive role by stating simply, "I started the band, I disbanded it."
So with the Beatles closed, Lennon didn't ease into some conventional solo career. Not at all.
He immediately entered his most brutally honest period of self-reflection and creative output, driven by therapy.
Right, attempting to process the trauma we discussed earlier, and that therapy was primal therapy.
From April to September 1970, he and Ono underwent intensive treatment with Dr. Arthur Janoff.
And this therapy, it aimed to confront and release the emotional pain buried since early childhood, specifically the abandonment by his parents. The process often involves screaming.
For you, the listener, who might not be familiar with it, primal therapy posits that neuroses stem from repressed traumatic childhood experiences.
So the therapy sought to bring those primal pains to the surface for emotional release, often through these intense cathartic screams.
And this brutal, unflinching honesty informed his raw solo debut, John Lennon Plastic Ono Band, from 1970.
Which was critically praised for its vulnerability, but commercially limited because of its stark sound and intensely personal lyrics.
There's a duality here, isn't there? This album is the sound of a man dismantling his own myth.
Perfectly put, and 2 tracks exemplify this. Mother is a direct, painful confrontation of his childhood rejection.
And then you have Working Class Hero, which was a scathing attack on Western social systems, class structure, and education.
So direct that it was censored by broadcasters for using profanity.
But here's where we see the instability of his political identity. He quickly shifted from confessional trauma to musical activism.
After an interview in January 1971, where radical journalist Tariq Ali shared these intense revolutionary political views, Lennon was just instantly galvanized.
He wrote Power to the People,
which was a sharp reversal from his earlier, more cautious stance on radical change, as he expressed in the Beatles' song Revolution.
But that political pivot was something he later questioned himself.
He did. He disowned Power to the People, admitting it was born out of guilt and a desire for approval from political radicals like Ali. He was trying to reconcile his pacifism with a desire for confrontational engagement.
It shows he was searching for the appropriate use of his enormous platform.
And this search for relevance, and frankly commercial success, led him to pivot again for his next album, Imagine, in 1971.
He consciously adopted a much more accessible and sophisticated sound. He was eager to sell records and reach a mass audience again.
And Imagine succeeded wildly. It was commercially massive and culturally iconic, but the success brought controversy.
The title track became a global anti-war anthem, yet its lyrics profoundly offended religious groups.
Because it proposed a world with no countries, no possessions, and importantly, no religion too.
Lennon justified this by saying he was imagining a world without the division caused by religious conflict, specifically without the "my God is bigger than your God" dynamic.
It was a utopian vision, but one that actively challenged deeply held beliefs.
This era also featured intense, regrettable inner Beatles hostility, the song "How Do You Sleep?"
A direct, vicious musical attack on Paul McCartney. It was prompted by lyrics on McCartney's album Ram that Lennon felt were directed at him and Ono.
And McCartney later confirmed they were.
He did. And if we link this back to our theme of duality, this track is a clear failure of his own stated ideals of peace and love.
He later softened his stance, claiming he wrote the song about himself, using his resentment toward Paul as a vehicle for his own self-hatred.
But what's remarkable is that at the same time, he was exhibiting profound self-awareness in other songs like Jealous Guy,
Where he addressed his demeaning treatment of women, he cited his past chauvinistic attitude and insecurity.
and openly acknowledged to the world that he had been a hitter until he met Ono.
That confession just shows the power of the therapy. He was willing to be ugly and vulnerable in public.
That level of self-exposure is just so rare for a global superstar, and it connected him intimately with his audience.
The political intensity ramped up immediately after moving to New York City in August 1971.
The couple quickly immersed themselves in radical left politics, releasing the single Happy Xmas, War is Over in December, designed as a direct anti-Vietnam War message.
And this activism drew serious, hostile attention from the highest levels of government.
The Nixon administration. They viewed Lennon's anti-war and anti-Nixon propaganda as a genuine threat to his re-election campaign.
So they initiated a 4-year deportation attempt. This was explicitly called a strategic countermeasure.
Republican Senator Strom Thurmond specifically suggested deportation would be a useful tool against Lennon's influence.
And the legal grounds cited by the INS were so flimsy, his 1968 misdemeanor marijuana conviction in London.
But the political motivation was crystal clear, especially concerning a planned concert at the 1972 Republican National Convention,
where he intended to use his voice to influence young voters.
His commitment to radical political causes continued aggressively with some time in New York City in 1972.
A collaboration with Ono and the band Elephant's Memory. This double LP was highly topical.
It tackled everything from race relations in Woman is the Nigger of the World to women's rights and Britain's role in Northern Ireland,
including The Luck of the Irish and Sunday Bloody Sunday.
And for you, the listener, we must pause and provide context for why those Northern Ireland tracks were so volatile.
Bloody Sunday occurred in January 1972, when British soldiers shot 26 unarmed civil rights protesters in Derry, killing 14.
It was a moment of profound national trauma and international condemnation. So when Lennon followed up this event by stating he would side with the IRA over the British Army,
a statement that certainly garnered attention from both the U.S. and U.K. government.
It was highly inflammatory. His cousin Stanley Parks later claimed Lennon gave money to the IRA, although Ono has always vehemently denied this.
Critically and commercially, Sometime in New York City was a disaster.
Critics maligned it for its heavy-handed and relentless political sloganeering, with the enemy deriding Lennon as a pathetic, aging revolutionary.
It lacked the subtlety of Imagine and the raw honesty of Plastic Ono Band.
Yet despite the critical failure, his direct political action still had impact. In December 1971, he and Ono performed at the John Sinclair Freedom Rally in Ann Arbor, Michigan,
protesting the poet's draconian 10-year prison sentence for selling just 2 joints.
The energy of that 15,000-person rally was undeniable. 4 days after the rally, reduced penalties for marijuana were passed in Michigan, and Sinclair was released on bond.
It shows the power of the platform when used strategically.
And finally, we have the ultimate validation of the government's fears. Historian John Wiener undertook a 14-year legal battle to force the release of the FBI files on Lennon.
And the released documents, surveillance reports, memos to the White House, a proposal for his arrest, clearly validated that the entire deportation attempt was politically motivated.
Orchestrated to silence a highly effective political voice. This is the importance for the modern listener. The documents confirm that powerful governments viewed his voice as a genuine threat.
As we transition into the mid-70s, Lennon's relationships and his art became completely tied to a period of intense personal turmoil.
And a dramatic, temporary separation from Ono. But first, let's revisit the profound impact of his first family.
Right. The initial dynamic with Cynthia Lennon and their son, Julian, was defined by secrecy.
John married Cynthia Powell in 1962, just as Beatlemania was taking off. And manager Brian Epstein insisted the marriage and Julian's birth in April 1963 be kept secret.
He genuinely feared a married Beatle would alienate the female fans.
The cost of this secrecy was huge. Lennon was on tour when Julian were born and didn't see his son for the first 3 days.
And the legacy of that initial distance persisted through Julian's childhood.
It's why Julian felt a greater bond with Paul McCartney, who famously composed Hey Jules, which later became Hey Jude for him during the chaos of the divorce.
Lennon's own attempts to reconcile this distance were just fraught. He later classified Sean as a planned child, while Julian was not.
And while he insisted, I don't love Julian any less as a child, the material legacy was heartbreaking. He left Julian very little in his will.
This internal friction just set the stage for the infamous Lost Weekend. In 1973, Lennon and Ono decided to separate.
And the ensuing 18-month period was spent in Los Angeles and New York City with May Pang, who had been their personal assistant.
What makes this so fascinating and shows the unusual dynamics of their relationship is that Ono suggested the relationship with Pang.
She did. She told Pang that she and Lennon were becoming estranged and bluntly said, he likes you a lot, suggesting she become his companion.
It was not a traditional breakup. It was a strategically managed distance.
But this period quickly descended into chaos for Lennon. In L.A., he was drinking heavily with musician Harry Nilsson, leading to highly publicized, embarrassing incidents.
We're talking about a man known globally for peace, reduced to heckling the Smothers Brothers at a club until he was physically ejected.
And in a moment of just alcohol-fueled absurdity, sticking an unused menstrual pad on his forehead.
We need to pause on that image for a moment. It's the highest contrast you can imagine.
The most famous person on Earth, having just been targeted by the U.S. government, is now in a state of self-destruction and public chaos.
It tells you the weight of his persona and the stress of his activism had completely overwhelmed his stability.
Yet, despite the chaos, the Lost Weekend was crucial for one positive thing: reconnection.
May Pang actively encouraged Lennon to reestablish regular, meaningful contact with Julian, whom he hadn't seen for 2 years.
They visited Disneyland together, and Lennon even gave Julian a drumming part on a track for his upcoming album, Walls and Bridges.
Pang also helped him rekindle friendships with Starr and McCartney, showing a healthy influence amidst all the drinking.
And Walls and Bridges, the album he recorded during this period, proved to be a commercial triumph.
Primarily thanks to the single Whatever Gets You Through the Night, featuring Elton John.
And that became Lennon's only solo single during his lifetime to top the U.S. Billboard Hot 100 chart.
The Lost Weekend ended abruptly in February 1975.
After Ono claimed to have found a cure for smoking.
The reunion itself is a strange story. Lennon returned to Pang's home, stupefied and confused, leading Pang to believe he had been brainwashed.
Lennon just told Pang the separation was over, but strangely claimed Ono would allow him to continue seeing her.
A condition Lennon evidently rejected, committing fully to Ono.
Artistically, this era also saw powerful collaborations. He co-wrote and performed on Fame in 1975 with David Bowie,
which became Bowie's first U.S. #1.
He also honored a famous promise to Elton John, because Whatever Gets You Through the Night hit #1. He made a surprise guest appearance at Madison Square Garden in November 1974.
He performed that hit, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, and I Saw Her Standing There,
which he humorously introduced as a song by an old estranged fiancé of mine called Paul.
That was a high point. His absolute last stage appearance was in April 1975 for the ATV special A Salute to Lou Grade.
The band, called Etc., notably wore masks, a final, pointed dig at the media magnate Grade being two-faced.
Following that, Lennon entered a dedicated 5-year hiatus from music and public life.
After Sean Ono Lennon was born on his 35th birthday, Ono agreed to continue the pregnancy only if Lennon committed to becoming a full-time house husband.
This was a seismic cultural shift. The rock and roll icon devoted himself entirely to domesticity.
He described this time simply as when he baked bread and looked after the baby, rising at 6 a.m. daily to prepare meals and care for Sean.
He even formally announced the break in Tokyo in 1977. He was meticulous, taking photographs of Sean every single day for his first year.
This hiatus allowed him to regain the stability and calm that had been absent since the Beatles started touring. He had found the structure his childhood had denied him.
And the end of the hiatus came in June 1980, sparked by a nautical adventure.
A sailing trip to Bermuda. The boat hit a severe storm, and Lennon took command during the tempest.
An experience that profoundly reinvigorated his creative muse and led him to write the tracks for his return album.
That album was Double Fantasy, a collaboration with Ono that directly reflected his newfound stable family life.
Initially, reviews were lukewarm. Melody Maker called it indulgent sterility, a god-awful yawn.
A critical misreading that was tragically rectified just 3 weeks later.
At approximately 10:50 p.m. on December 8, 1980, Lennon and Ono were returning to the Dakota.
Earlier that day, he had autographed a copy of Double Fantasy for a man named Mark David Chapman.
Chapman waited and then shot Lennon 4 times. He was rushed to Roosevelt Hospital and pronounced dead at 11:15 p.m. at the age of 40.
The response was immediate and overwhelming. The aftermath saw a massive surge in the popularity of the very work that had been dismissed just weeks prior.
In the weeks following the murder, just like starting over, and Double Fantasy topped charts globally, Imagine and Woman both hit #1 in the UK in 1981.
They confirmed the profound and enduring power of his final reflective work.
Beyond the political and personal narrative, Lennon's technical contributions as a musician were profound and often misunderstood. Let's start with his vocal style.
Absolutely. Famously raw and aggressive. His vocal technique was heavily influenced by American R&B artists like Little Richard and Larry Williams.
Krinicky and MacDonald described his voice as a brassy northern roar flecked with bluesy moans,
which contrasted sharply with the conventionally glamorous voices of earlier pop stars. Nick Kuhn called it one of the best pop voices ever, rasped and smashed and brooding, always fierce.
This intensity was on full display in Twist and Shout. When recording it, he was suffering from a cold and described the process bluntly. "I couldn't sing the damn thing, I was just screaming."
He literally shredded his vocal cords in service of the performance. And it's a widely known irony that he had an inborn dislike of his own voice.
Which is why producer George Martin constantly double-tracked it and used effects to make it sound different.
And on the technical side, there's an amazing anecdote connecting his choices back to his childhood.
Right. Producer Jack Douglas later claimed Lennon habitually tuned his D string slightly flat.
Why? It was a personal sonic fingerprint so that his Aunt Mimi could identify his specific guitar playing on any recording.
That's a quiet tribute to the woman who tried to keep him grounded.
It really is. In terms of instrumentation, he moved from the harmonica and that first Galatone acoustic to serious rhythm guitar with the Quarrymen.
His primary electric guitars that shaped the sound of the Beatles were the Rickenbacker 325, the Epiphone Casino, and the Gibson J160E.
And we can't forget the piano, of course. It was the instrument on which he composed Imagine.
Now, we must pivot to his formidable talent as a writer and humorist that predated his global music fame. We talked about the Daily Howl.
And that love for nonsense writing blossomed into published works in the mid-1960s, in his own right, and A Spaniard in the Works.
They were collections of nonsense writings, poetry, plays, and line drawings, heavily influenced by writers like Lewis Carroll.
The critical reception was surprisingly serious. The Times literary supplement praised them for their pure fantasy and innovative wordplay,
which genuinely surprised Lennon. This validated his intellectual pursuits outside of music. In 1968, it was even adapted for the stage.
And this ability to merge art, concept, and humor continued with his work alongside Ono in the world of conceptual art, particularly the Fluxus movement.
So for the listener, we should define Fluxus. It was an international anti-art experimental movement that valued the idea, the concept, over the finished object.
It often involved humor, simplicity, and audience participation. It aligned perfectly with Lennon's nonconformist, disruptive nature.
In 1968, he held his own Fluxus-inspired exhibition, You Are Here, dedicated to Ono.
The central piece was a 6-foot diameter round white monochrome painting with only the tiny inscription of the title on the surface.
The show itself was pure conceptual art. For the opening, he released 365 white balloons into the sky, each with a card attached, asking the finder to mail it back to him.
The art was the process and the participation. He also created the complete Yoko Ono word poem game in 1970, which utilized the cut-up aleatory technique.
So to explain the cut-up technique, he took his famous White Album portrait, cut it into 134 pieces, wrote a word on the back of each, and left it for Ono to assemble randomly.
The finished piece was determined by chance, removing the artist's direct control, a core tenet of the Fluxus movement.
But not all his art was so abstract. The Bag 1 lithographs, drawn in 1969 to chronicle his wedding and honeymoon, were far more graphic and controversial.
When exhibited in 1970, police confiscated 8 of the 14 lithographs on grounds of indecency.
The sheer depth and influence of his final work after his death is reflected in the accolades. Double Fantasy won the 1981 Grammy for Album of the Year.
And he was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame twice, once with the Beatles and as a solo artist.
His name is now a global brand, reflecting his cultural influence everywhere. John Lennon Airport in Liverpool, a crater on Mercury, even a John Lennon Park in Havana, Cuba.
And finally, his musical influence extended far beyond his life, culminating in 2023 with Now and Then.
Utilizing advanced tech to isolate his original demo voice, allowing the surviving Beatles to finally complete what was dubbed the last Beatles song.
It brought his fractured story full circle.
So what does this entire complex journey mean for us? We've traced his transformation from a difficult, trauma-affected Liverpool youth into a global icon.
Whose true complexity, the anger, the jealousy, the political idealism, was always most clearly revealed in his most personal and politically charged works.
The enduring nature of his legacy, as historians have noted, rests on these very things.
The self-portraits in his songs, which spoke to, for, and about the human condition in such a radically vulnerable way.
He was a paradox, a pacifist and utopian visionary who struggled intensely with anger, addiction, and personal failings in private.
It showed us the full spectrum of the human experience.
And here's where it gets really interesting, and something to consider long after this deep dive ends.
John Lennon's voice and activism were so effective that the Nixon administration viewed him as a true threat to the electoral process,
Leading to that 4-year deportation battle.
This raises a critical question for the modern era. If his voice was seen as a political weapon by the most powerful office in the world,
How does that amplify the importance of modern artists who choose to prioritize political conviction and critical thinking, sometimes at the expense of commercial success?
it forces us to ask whether vulnerability, when backed by fame, truly becomes the ultimate political weapon.
Lennon proved that having a massive platform and using it to genuinely challenge power structures, even if the art is flawed, can be seen by the establishment as a genuine threat.
And that sustained, disruptive tension flowing from his childhood trauma all the way to the Dakota is the ultimate enduring power of John Lennon's legacy.
A profound thought to end on. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the layers of John Lennon.